In this session, we are going to deal with non-positivist methodology. So the context is already clear for you. We have discussed about positivism and its critique or its limitation. So we have seen there are certain limitations for employing positivism in sociology. So we need to have an alternate method or alternate approach, and that's why we are going for non-positivism. Okay, so we have discussed about Weber, and I told you Weber is considered to have bridged the gap between positivist and non-positivist. Weber is not a pure positivist and he is also not a pure non-positivist. Weber is positivist in terms of the methods, and Weber is non-positivist in terms of the scope of subject matter. For Weber, the scope of subject matter is studying social action. That means the meanings attached by the actor to his action. So that's what you need to study. So obviously this is subjective in nature. So scope for Weber is subjective, but the methodology that you are using is objective, or he stressed on objectivity. So his understanding is basically studying sociology in an objective way, but the subject matter of sociology is subjective because you are going to study the meanings attached by the actor to his action, and that meanings will be always subjective. Different investigators are conducting the study will come up with different interpretations or different meanings. Okay, so I hope this is clear for all of you. Now let's look at the context once again. So what we have seen till now is positivism and its limitation. So what are the important elements of positivism? Firstly, we have seen this is based on empiricism, inductivism, and naturalism. Okay, I'm talking about positivism. We'll come to non-positivism after this. Okay, the topic of today's discussion is non-positivism, but I'm giving a quick recap of what we have done. So the three important elements of positivism is actually empiricism, inductivism, and naturalism. Then we have discussed about the various elements. So first I told you positivism stresses on studying the external realities. Okay, so external realities. So I discussed about Emil Durkheim also. He stressed on studying social facts and external realities. But when I've discussed about Max Weber, I told you he stressed on the study of meanings. That is nothing but internal aspects. Okay. So non-positivist, on the other hand, you can see they are going to stress more on internal aspects of the meanings, motives, etc., which is attached by the actor to his action. The second important point that we have discussed under positivism is use of scientific methods, right? Then we have seen theoretical orientation. Okay, so another important element of positivism is theoretical orientation. Then we have seen next point that the theories which is formed must be testable also. Okay, so these are the points that we have stressed on when we discussed about positivism, and we have seen the limitations of these points, right? So what are they? See, we have seen the first point, instead of inductive approach, deductive approach is much better in sociology. Then we have seen positivism is actually a partial understanding of society because you are studying only the external aspects. You are not giving importance or emphasis for the internal aspects like love, hatred, mental relationship, or the meanings attached by the actor to his action, etc. A third limitation that we have seen is the methods which is used in positivism is practically inapplicable in sociological research. Okay, so the scientific methods, the methods which is used in natural science may not be applicable to sociology with ease. Then we have seen the problems related to objectivity. Then we have seen the problems in methods. Then we have seen the problems in testability, right? So positivism came under a lot of criticism, and that is the context for non-positivism. So you can see towards the end of 18th century and early 19th century, the positivist approach like empiricism, inductivism, and naturalism, etc., came to be questioned by an alternative school of thought, and they are broadly referred to as idealists. And the scientists like William Dilthey, okay, William Dilthey and Heinrich Rickert highlighted the difference between the natural world and the social world. Okay, so they highlighted the difference between natural world and social world. So basic difference is in natural world you can see everything as external reality, but when it comes to social world there are a lot of elements which is related to internal aspects like love, hatred, emotions, mental relationships, the meanings attached by the actor to his action, etc. According to them, Dilthey and Rickert, the social world is unique in terms of the meanings or symbols or the values which govern it. Okay, so social world comprise of these elements, various values. You know what is values, right? It's based on the it's actually the preferability or rejection of certain things, right? So values, beliefs, practices, meanings, symbols, etc. So social world comprise of all these things. And the natural world, on the other hand, is guided by laws of nature. So they highlighted that there are some internal sides which exist in the form of ideas in the minds of individual. So that is also given importance. Okay, so that also need to be given importance, and the study of social world is entirely different to the study of natural world. The famous German idealist George Hegel, okay, George Hegel is of the opinion that social phenomena are the result of ideas generated in the minds of individual. So social phenomena are based on the ideas which is generated in the minds of the individual, and that's what we call as Hegelian speculative philosophy. Okay, so that's what Hegelian philosophy. We will come to Hegelian philosophy when we discuss about Marx in detail. So what Marx will do is, instead of ideas, he replaces it with material things. Okay, so what Hegel says is there will be changes in society based on the ideas, but what Marx says is there will be changes in society based on the change in material condition. We will come to all these things in detail in the future classes, but now just to have an idea, I'm just giving you an understanding about Hegel. What he is saying is also the same thing that we have seen in case of Dilthey and Rickert, that the natural world and the social world is different. So all these views were in contradiction with the views of positivism, right? So till now whatever we have discussed, now what we are discussing is entirely opposite, right? So there exists a natural world and a social world, and both are different. In sociology, although the initial perspective used was positivism, but by the end of 19th century, an alternative school inspired by the idealist emerged, okay, which later on came to be known as non-positivist school, okay, non-positivist school, or even anti-positivist school, anti-positivist school. So if you want to see the relation between positivism and non-positivism, there is not a drastic change. So first positivism, then you can see idealism, okay, then you can see non-positivism or anti-positivism, and Weber will come somewhere in between, not purely idealist also, somewhere in between. He had some element of positivism, there is an element of non-positivism also. So this perspective, non-positivist school or anti-positivist school, this perspective posed its origin in sociology in the writings of Max Weber. Okay, so Max Weber is considered to have introduced this alternative perspective, or started, or gave the starting point. So you can say Max Weber in Germany and G.H. Mead. We will be studying about Mead also. G.H. Mead in America to an extent. Okay, so America. So these two are not purely non-positivist. That also need to be very careful about. They are between positivist and non-positivist, or rather you can even say that they are idealist. Weber's ideas represent a transition from positivism to non-positivism. It is said that by introducing a new dimension to the subject matter, he brought non-positivism to sociology. Okay, so he basically brought a new dimension to sociology. According to him, the task of sociology, as we have discussed earlier, is to study social action and to understand the meanings attached by the actor to his action, and you need to arrive at an explanation of cause and effect relationship. So between what? Cause and effect relationship between what? The meaning attached by the actor and the action. So according to him, the task of sociology is to study the human action and the meanings attached by the actor to their action. At the same time, Weber argued that the science of society must be based on the use of scientific methods and establishment of cause and effect relationship. So that's what I told you earlier. See, if you observe here, on one hand, okay, on one hand, Weber says you study social action, right, or human action, and on the other hand, Weber is saying it's a science of society. So you should study by using scientific method, and you arrive at an explanation of cause and effect relationship, and you should follow an objective approach, right? So social action and meanings. So if you look at this, on one side he is talking about human action and also talking about meanings attached by the actor to his action, and that is subjective. That is not the element of positivism, right? That is contradiction to positivism. But if you look at the next aspect, using scientific methods, that is positivism only. Arrive cause and effect relationship, that is also positivism. Positivist also stress on cause and effect relationship. Then study objectively, that is also positivism. That's what I told you, there is an element of positivism and non-positivism in the writings of Weber, or in the methodology of Weber, or in the approach of Weber. And you can say that Weber is considered to have bridged the gap between these two. So Weber is the midpoint. If you consider positivist on one extreme and non-positivist on the other extreme, Weber will lie on in between. And Mead also to an extent is considered as idealist. So you can write a sentence like this: sometimes it is argued that Weber is positivist in terms of methodology but non-positivist in terms of scope of sociology. And that's what I told you earlier also. You need to be very clear with this. What I mean with this, he is positivist in terms of methodology. So here if you see, he is positivist. So I'm talking about methodology. So in terms of use of methodology, he is positivist. And when we discuss about the subject matter or the scope of sociology, he is non-positivist. So what is this? Scope. In terms of scope of sociology, is non-positivist. And in the same way, G.H. Mead, we will be studying about G.H. Mead in detail later. G.H. Mead proposed an interactionist perspective. Okay, so he proposed interactionist perspective, and you can see that in his book Mind, Self and Society. So in his book Mind, Self and Society, he proposed an interactionist perspective, G.H. Mead. Now, one thing which I need to discuss in detail in G.H. Mead only, but let me tell you that G.H. Mead never wrote a book. In fact, his student Bloomer wrote the book about this perspective. So what he have done is he compiled all the writings of G.H. Mead and formulated into a perspective which is known as symbolic interactionism. So this approach was later on formulated into a perspective by Bloomer, which is known as symbolic interactionism. So G.H. Mead's approach is known as symbolic interactionism. So symbolic interactionist perspective, interactionism. Okay, so you need to be careful about this name also. Whose perspective is this? G.H. Mead. But you cannot see any books or any perspective named after G.H. Mead. It is actually formulated by his student Bloomer later. So symbolic interactionism is also forms part of the non-positivist methodology, but not in a pure form. According to Mead, the human behavior is governed by internal processes by which people interpret the world around them. Okay, so internal processes by which people interpret internal processes. So human world is governed by internal processes by which people interpret the world around them and give meanings to their own life. So there are certain internal processes through which you will interpret the world around you and give meanings to your own life. I hope you understood. These meanings are built up and reinforced and modified in the process of interaction with other members of society. So there are certain internal processes through which you will interpret the world around you, and you give meanings to your own life or your own world. Okay, you give meanings, and these meanings, okay, you form certain meanings or understanding in your childhood, and when you grow up it will be reinforced, it will be modified, and it will be built up. Depends on the way you interact with others and depends on the peer group, etc. And this interaction process is mediated by the use of symbols. So all these things in detail we will be discussing in GH Meet's last thinger, but here I am just giving you everything of GH Meet in one paragraph. So there are certain internal processes through which you will interpret the world around you and you give meaning to your own life, and these meanings are built up, reinforced and modified through the interaction that you will take place with your peer group, parents, etc., teachers, etc. later. And the interaction is done through symbols. Now, one more point, the interactionist also is not overruling the use of scientific methodology and also the establishment of cause and effect relationships. So they are also giving some importance for the use of scientific method and establishment of cause and effect relationship. That means there is an element of positivism exists in interactionist also. So what all things we have discussed is, we have discussed about positivism, we have discussed about its critique, we have discussed about Rickert, Dilthey, okay, then we have discussed about Weber, and I told you Weber is considered to have non-positivist in terms of subject matter and positivist in terms of methodology. There is an element of positivism as well as non-positivism, but you can see a deviation, right? Then when it comes to interactionist, it is introduced by G.H. Mead and later it was formulated into a perspective which is known as symbolic interactionism by Blumer. That Blumer is a student, okay? Now even in interactionism also there are use of scientific methods and they are also giving importance for cause and effect relationship. That means there is an element of positivism still there. Now the radical departure from positivism you can see from the next perspective onwards. So we have understood what is positivism and its limitation. Then we have seen non-positivism, the beginning, right? We have talked about Weber. We have talked about G.H. Mead, George Herbert Mead and his student Blumer. So we are going to start with non-positivism, or you can say Weber laid the foundation for non-positivism through an interpretivist approach, okay? So you can write Weber followed interpretive approach. Then you can see other approaches like symbolic interactionism, interactionist approach by G.H. Mead and Blumer, right? So G.H. Mead and his student Blumer, symbolic interactionism. Symbolic interactionism. Now in Weber's study you can see in detail, we will be learning about all those things later. You can see approaches like Verstehen and ideal types, etc. So he introduced various methods for studying social phenomena or social action. Ideal type is one method, Verstehen is other method. So if you remember, I told you he stressed on methods to ensure objectivity. So all these things we'll discuss in detail when we discuss about Weber. But as of now, just understand Weber is not a pure non-positivist. He is considered to have bridged the gap between the two. Then you can talk about G.H. Mead and Blumer. Okay. Then the pure non-positivist, the first person, or you can see in 1930s, okay, in 1930s, Alfred Schutz, he introduced phenomenology. Okay, he's a pioneer of phenomenological perspective. Then you can see after this 1940s, non-positivism further enriched with the help of Harold Garfinkel with the idea of ethnomethodology. We will discuss about phenomenology and ethnomethodology in detail now itself. Ethnomethodology. Okay, so I hope we have already done this discussion, interpretive approach. More detail about interpretive approach you will see when we discuss about Weber, because we need to discuss more about Weber. So 3 theories we need to discuss about Weber. So in all those cases you can understand this approach and his methods much better. And here if you get a question on non-positivism, hardly you can write one paragraph because Weber is not a pure non-positivist. At the same time, if you get a question on positivism, you need to mention about Weber in 1 or 2 lines. Okay, so if you get a question specifically on interpretive sociology, Okay, then you need to write more of Weber, and that we are going to study when we discuss about Weber. Same is the case with G.H. Mead also. Symbolic interactionism as a perspective in detail we are going to discuss under Mead. Okay, so these two people I am keeping it aside now. Interpretive sociology and interactionist approach I am keeping it aside, but I have given you a glimpse of what you need to write here and what you need to, or what you are going to study in the future classes, right? So we need to discuss more about Alfred Schutz and Harold Garfinkel, or Phenomenology and Ethnomethodology. So till now what we have discussed, from this what you can conclude is, before I am going to Phenomenology and Ethnomethodology, on one side you can write positivism and on the other side non-positivism. So what all things we understood about positivism and non-positivism? So positivism primarily is based on a structural approach, right? Structural approach. On the other hand, non-positivism is primarily an interactional approach. Interactional approach. So structural approach and interactional approach. Then second important aspect that you have seen is positivism uses a macro perspective, right? Macro. On the other hand, non-positivism predominantly follow a micro approach. Then you can write the positivism is based on external realities, or they are talking about society or the normative structure. Okay, so it is based on normative approach. It is having a normative approach. On the other hand, when it comes to interactionist or non-positivism, it is individual specific. Individual specific. Okay, individual specific methods. Then when we discuss about positivism, it follows a nomothetic approach. Nomothetic approach. On the other hand, non-positivism follow ideographic approach. Okay, ideographic approach. So these are the differences that you can highlight if you need to write one paragraph about the differences of positivism and non-positivism. Now again, one more important point that you can write is positivism is stressing a lot on objectivity. Non-positivism, that much stress on objectivity is not there. So you can write objectivity here, not here, not much objectivity. So you can write subjectivity is also favored or appreciated. Now here, now positivism, you can see a lot of instances on stress on theory building, but on the other side it is just describing. Okay, or you can write in positivism causal explanation, causal explanations, and that's what I mean by theory building. Generalization of causal explanation is theory, right? Now here, describing the phenomena. Okay, describing the phenomena. So these are the differences that you can highlight. Now let's move on to phenomenology. Now this is the first perspective to be recognized as a purely non-positivist one. So the first perspective which is recognized as purely non-positivist method is phenomenology. Okay, so we have seen interactionism, we have seen symbolic interactionism and interpretive method, right? They are not purely non-positivist, because although in terms of subject matter they followed a non-positivist approach, but when it comes to the study of the subject matter they followed a positivist approach. They stressed on scientific methods, they stressed on objectivity, they stressed on theory building, etc. Right? So phenomenology is the first method that you can say as purely non-positivist. Phenomenology represents the most radical departure from positivist perspective. Okay, so you can see entirely a different approach from positivism. But when we discussed about Weber and when we discussed about Mead, there are elements of positivism as well as non-positivism. Now, here you can see a radical departure from positivism. Now, this perspective took shape in the writings of Alfred Schutz. Okay, so this is a name which we need to discuss about in phenomenology. Alfred Schutz. So his book name, The Phenomenology of the Social World in 1932. Okay, so Phenomenology of Social World in 1932, he highlighted this perspective. Initially, it was actually introduced by Edmund Husserl. Okay, so there is an influence of this person, Edmund Husserl, but you don't want to discuss about Edmund Husserl and all. So you can straight away write about Alfred Schutz, who introduced this perspective. So Alfred Schutz is more concerned about the way people grasp the consciousness of others, even though they are living in their own life and their own stream of thoughts and expressions. Okay, so you live in your own world, but still you try to grasp the consciousness of others. So he is concerned about that, and his study of phenomenology is basically based on that. Now, in positivism, we have discussed they are stressing a lot on theory building and causal explanation, but when it comes to phenomenology, you cannot see any such kind of causal explanation, or they completely rejected the possibility of theory formation or such kind of causal explanations. According to this perspective, human beings make sense of the world by imposing subjective meanings. Okay, so you need to understand the meanings. It's not just about the external realities. You need to understand the meanings of others. So Alfred Schutz gave more importance to grasping the consciousness of others, even though you are living in your own stream. Okay, so human world is all about subjective meanings. According to this perspective, there is no objective reality beyond these subjective meanings. Okay, so everything is related to the subjective meanings which is generated or which is there in the minds of the individual. And you can say phenomenology is basically a subjective understanding of subjective reality. So the reality for phenomenologists is subjective, and the understanding or study is also subjective. If you see positivism, that is about objective understanding of objective reality. The reality is objective because you are studying external reality and you are using scientific methods, so objective understanding. So objective understanding of objective reality is what positivism. Now this is how you can simply understand. Objective understanding of objective reality. What is this? This is what? Positivism. When we discussed about Weber, I told you the subject matter is not necessarily external realities. It can be the meanings. That means it is subjective. Okay, so the subject matter is subjective for Weber, but you need to study it objectively. So how can you write or how can you represent that? Objective understanding of subjective reality. The reality is subjective, right? Meanings, human actions. So Weber, so this is positivism, right? Now interpretivism, that is what Weber. So for Weber, objective understanding of subjective reality. Okay, subjective reality. Now when we goes to non-positivism, the phenomenology is a first pure non-positivist perspective. So you can see the subject matter is also subjective and the method is also subjective. So you can write phenomenology or non-positivism as subjective understanding of subjective reality. Okay, subjective understanding of subjective reality. So this is how you can simply understand positivism, interpretivism and non-positivism. Positivism, objective understanding of objective reality. Interpretivism, objective understanding of subjective reality. The reason is, why subjective reality? You are studying the meanings and human actions. Why objective understanding? Because you are using scientific methods. Phenomenology is subjective understanding of subjective reality. The reality is subjective and the method also is subjective. So when we talk about phenomenology, the evolution you can write like this, starting from Edmund Husserl, the basic thoughts. Okay, then it is developed more specifically by Alfred Schutz. Okay, Alfred Schutz in his book The Phenomenology of Social World. The Phenomenology of Social World. Okay, the Phenomenology of Social World. Then this perspective is furthermore systematized in the writings of Peter Berger and Thomas Luckmann. These are the three names or four names that you need to write if you are writing about. I'll give you one more name, Gabriela Farina. Okay, and I give you one statement also. You can conclude that phenomenology understanding with that statement. Okay, in the end I'll give you that. So Edmund Husserl, Alfred Schutz, Peter Berger and Thomas Luckmann in their Social Construction of Reality. The book name was The Social Construction of Reality. Social Construction of Reality. You need to write the year also, 1967. Here the Phenomenology of Social World year is 1932. So don't make any mistake when you're writing the year. Okay. So these are the three names that you need to write. So the fundamental principle of phenomenologist is actually there is no objective reality beyond the subjective meanings of the individual, and it emphasizes more on understanding rather than theory building. and also the use of scientific methods is very, very minimum. So they are more emphasizing on understanding rather than theory building. So they are not stressing on objectivity. Okay, so these are the key points that you need to write. And there is no objective reality beyond the subjective meanings. Now when you discuss about phenomenology, one more thinker which you can write is Gabriela Farina. Gabriela Farina. Okay. In her, this is a recent book. Okay. In her book, some reflections on the phenomenological method. Some reflections on the phenomenological method. The year is 2014. See, this is a recent book. You are writing the name of the book, and the statement will be very good value addition for you. Okay, you'll get good mark if you are able to write this. That means you are reading the new book, right? So just need to know one statement. What does that mean? You read the book. Okay. So what she says is, you can write down this: phenomenology is neither a doctrine, comma, nor a philosophical school, comma, but is merely a style of thought, and a method by which the investigator can have different experiences and results each time. Okay, so basically you conduct study on a particular phenomena, you get different results and different experience each time. See, the reason is meanings do not have their own independent existence, right? They are constructed and reconstructed by the actors during their course of social interaction. So there is no independent existence for meaning throughout lifespan. Okay, so it is constructed, reconstructed, modified, okay, through their social interactions. So basically, from a phenological perspective, the social world is full of meanings, and there is no objective reality beyond these subjective meanings. So you can write about Gabriela Farina. According to Gabriela Farina, in her book Some Reflections on Phenomenological Method 2014, phenomenology is neither a doctrine nor a philosophical school, but is merely a style of thought and a method by which investigator can get different experiences and different results each time they conduct the research about the same phenomena. I hope this is clear for all of you. So we have done with phenomenology. Let's now move on to ethnomethodology. Now before that, let me quickly discuss about interactionism. Right, symbolic interactionism, I have already discussed with you. I give you a few more points. So we are talking about Mead, right? So Mead understood the human beings and human behavior as governed by the internal processes. Okay, so internal processes, we have discussed the same points, by which the people interpret the world around them. So there are certain internal processes through which people interpret the world around them and give meanings to their own life, right? So we have discussed the same point, internal processes. You will interpret the world around them and give meanings to their own life. Okay, we have seen all these things. And further he said this meanings is modified and reinforced through the process of social interaction, and the interaction is through symbols. All these things we have discussed. Okay, according to Mead, interactions are possible only through some symbols, and he called it as significant symbols like languages, like gestures, etc. Okay, so symbols or significant symbols like languages or gestures, etc. Okay, symbols, significant symbols, which is so languages or gestures, languages and gestures, etc. So symbolic interaction is basically stressing upon the interaction between the participating individuals, and this interaction takes place through symbols and gestures, and that's what you call as significant symbols. Okay, now when you talk about symbolic interactionism, one of the other contribution in symbolic interactionism you can see from Irving Goffman. Okay, so these are the names that you need to write. You need to mention G.H. Mead and his student Herbert Blumer, and then Irving Goffman, and you can see he also used symbolic interactionism perspective successfully in various studies. Like one example is his studies of mental asylums. You can write he is also one of the pioneer in symbolic interactionism, and you can see the use of symbolic interactionism in the studies of mental asylums. Okay, now one more important thing that you can write under symbolic interactionism is Joel M. Sharon. Okay, so his book is Symbolic Interactionism, an introduction, an interpretation, and an integration. Why I made you to write this is basically because this is the reason 2004. Okay, in the year 2004. He highlights 5 basic characteristics. So if you are not able to write anything which we have discussed till now, you just need to mention the names of George Herbert Mead, Herbert Blumer, and just talk about the meanings, and then you just write about Erving Goffman, then highlight these 5 points, or you can write this as an introduction also. So remember this name and remember this book also. This will give you a value addition to your answer. Let's understand the characteristics of symbolic interactionism according to Joel M. Sharon in this book. Okay, so let's understand the 5 basic characteristics, and you should write this 5 basic characteristics in your answer. You get a question on symbolic interactionism, must attempt and must go for Joel M. Sharon and this book name and this 5 characteristics. You should not leave it. Okay, so this is more important, and this is enough for you. If you are getting a question on symbolic interactionism, this is enough. 50 words will be covered with this, and hardly you'll get a 120-word question. 5 characteristics. So first thing is, human beings should be considered as social and thinking beings. They have a capacity to think. Okay, so one thing, human beings should be considered as social and thinking beings. Second point, now human beings perceive their environments, their living environment, subjectively and not objectively. Okay, so humans perceive their environment subjectively. That means different people can have different interpretations about their meanings. Okay, so I'm just writing subjectively only, so I hope you will be taking down. Okay, so humans perceive their environment subjectively and not objectively. I'm not writing it completely. I'm expecting that you are taking down the lecture notes. Okay, now third one, the cause of any human actions lies in present, and they are not passive to their environment. So any human action, if you take the cause lies in present. So cause of human action lies in present. See, there are actions which follows a tradition. We will discuss about that when we discuss about Weber, and to an extent we will discuss the same in Parson also. Some actions we call it as traditional action and moral action, etc. We'll come to that, but here for symbolic interactionist, human actions lies in present. Okay, just for time being. Fourth and most important point is, human beings have an ability to think. Okay, in fact we covered this point in the first point itself. We have discussed social and thinking being. So here let's stress on this ability to think, and that's what differentiate the symbolic interactionist from the behaviorist roots. Okay, so human beings have an ability to think. Then the last point, mind is the result of socialization process, and it is not a thing, it's a process. See, why I am telling it is not a thing is because when we discuss about Emile Durkheim, we tell that everything is social fact. So for him, mind is also a social fact. Now if it is a social fact, you consider it as thing. Why? Because you consider it as external reality. But in practice, in actual reality, it is not external, right? It is internal. And it is not a thing, it is a process. Okay, so mind is a result of socialization process. I hope this is clear. Mind is a result of socialization process. So these are the 5 basic characteristics that you need to write when we discuss about symbolic interactionism. This in itself, you have enough, this 5 contents, this 5 points is enough to write an answer. So social and thinking being, they perceive their environment subjectively, not objectively. Cause of human action lies in the present. There is no tradition, this is not passive, right? Now ability to think, then mind is a result of socialization process. It's not a thing, it's a process. To the symbolic interactionist, socialization is a more dynamic process that allows people to develop the ability to think and to develop in distinctively human ways. Furthermore, socialization is not simply a one-way process in which the actor receives information, but it's a dynamic process in which the actor shapes or adapts information based on his needs. Now, another point you can write is, so I already told you thinking is very, very important, right? The ability to think or thinking being is very important. If you want, you can write about Herbert Blumer. According to Blumer, Non-symbolic interaction do not require thinking, but symbolic interactions require thinking. So we are talking about symbolic interactionism. So symbolic interactionism requires thinking. So Bloomer, non-symbolic interactionism, no need of thinking. Non-symbolic, no need of thinking, but symbolic need thinking. Okay, so these are the points that you can write under symbolic interactionism. Okay, so these are the 5 characteristics according to Joel M. Sharon. Otherwise, if you need in general the basic principles of symbolic interactionism, you can just take down basic principles of symbolic interactionism. Okay, we are discussing symbolic interactionism in detail because last 5 years you can see in 3 years this question is asked. Okay, based on symbolic interactionism. So that's why I'm discussing more about symbolic interactionism compared to the other discussions. And we are going to discuss more again when we discuss about Mead. So the first principle that you can write is human beings, unlike animals, they have a capacity or they have an ability to think, right? So they have a capacity to think. That's the most important assumption behind symbolic interactionism. Second, this capacity to think is because of the mind, and it is developed through a socialization process, right? So it is developed or shaped by social interaction and not any external forces, right? So that by social interaction. Third, symbolic interactionists focus on the small scale interaction, right? When we discuss about Durkheim and when you're going to discuss about Marx, I tell you they are focusing on macro, large scale phenomena, right? But when it comes to symbolic interactionists, small scale interactions. That is another principle. So small scale interactions. See, I am discussing this only from examination point of view. That's why I am discussing the minute points. Otherwise, these discussions are not enough. I can complete symbolic interactionism in 2-3 minutes. That's enough. So, small scale interactions. So, through social interaction process, the human beings learn the meanings and symbols which will actually help them to express their thought or thinking capacity. Okay. So, 4 meanings and symbols. Okay, so you can write they learn meanings and symbols through social interaction. So meanings and symbols, and that actually help them to express their capacity of thought. I already told you they have a capacity to think, right? The next point, the meanings and symbols that they learn through social interaction process will actually help them to do distinctively different actions. Okay, distinctive human actions and interactions. So it depends on the meanings and symbols. So different actions and interactions through the symbols and meanings. Okay, so that's what symbolic interactionism. Now you can see the use of symbolic interactionism. So when you discuss about symbolic interactionism, first point, first person is G.H. Mead. Okay, this should be there in your answer. Then a student, Herbert Bloomer. Okay, then I told you Joel M. Sharon. The 5 principles you can write. Then you should write about the use of symbolic interactionism in sociology, right? So I have given you one name already, Irving Goffman, right? In a study of mental asylums, okay? Then you can write one more study. You don't want to discuss too much or in detail about the study, just one word is enough, just to give a value addition, okay? Maybe half a mark extra. So you can write Arlie Hochschild, and this you can write in some other areas also. I'll come to that, I'll discuss that. Arlie Hochschild in her managed hurt in the year 1983. Okay, and one more you can write. So there's a study in Delta Airlines. Okay, there's a study in Delta Airlines. Basically she used symbolic interactions perspective. You don't want to know the result or other related things of this theory. Just have an idea that this is based on symbolic interactionist perspective. Then you can write, because you won't get any time to write all these things, neither you get space also. Okay, so next one more person, just a person and a book name, that's enough. Okay, so Arlie Hochschild in his managed hurt 1983, which is a study conducted in Delta Airlines, and she studied that how the air hostesses are managing their emotions to serve the passengers better, and she termed this as emotional labor. Okay, so emotional labor, these concepts are going to be very useful for you in some other chapters and topics also. You can use cut copy paste exactly the same content. Arlie Hochschild used symbolic interactionist perspective in her study Managed Hurt 1983 of Delta Airlines, and she highlighted or she studied how the air hostesses are managing their emotions to serve the passengers better, and she termed this as emotional labor. And she concludes that even the very personal things like emotions are commoditized. Now, if you want to write criticisms, like if you get a critical analysis question, I can give you a few criticisms of symbolic interactionism. So firstly, you can write it is not giving importance to macro. Then it is not giving importance to objectivity. Then it is not using any scientific methods. Then you can say there is no theories formed on the basis of this. Okay. Then you can say it is focusing on micro, ignoring macro, right? See, all these are common things you can write in your criticism. Apart from that, if you need to write few thinkers and their criticism, like for example, Marxist argues that the meanings are not generated. The meanings are not generated as a process of interaction, but it is actually through external force or because of class relationship. So meaning for lower classes defined and meaning for upper classes defined, and through this class relationship the meaning is defined. Or the social interaction is not the reason for development of meaning. It is the external force. Okay, so you will understand all those things better, but now just have an idea about what is symbolic interactionism and be in a position to write 3 or 4 criticism. And you can write two important studies, Irving Goffman, Mental Asylums, and Arlie Hochschild, Managed Hurt. Next, we will move on to another method in non-positivism, ethnomethodology. So basically, the route is like we started with positivism, then we discussed about criticisms, then we discussed about Weber, interpretive sociology. Positivism is objective understanding of objective reality. When we discuss about Weber, he considered to have bridged the gap between positivist and non-positivist. He is neither a pure positivist nor a pure non-positivist. His scope of sociology is subjective and the method used is objective. His scope of sociology is basically to study social action and by using scientific method. So we can say Weber's understanding is objective understanding of subjective reality. So positivism is objective understanding of objective reality. Weber, objective understanding of subjective reality. Then when we discussed about Mead is also not a pure positivist, not a pure non-positivist. After that we discussed about phenomenology, Alfred Schutz. Then I told you this is a radical departure from positivism and this is subjective understanding of subjective reality. So 3 aspects: positivism, objective understanding of objective reality. Interpretive sociologist means objective understanding of subjective reality. There is an element of positivism and non-positivism. When it comes to phenomenologists, there is a radical departure. This is a pure non-positivist perspective. So pure non-positivist means subjective understanding of subjective reality. There is no objectivity beyond the subjective meanings of the individual. So here we have discussed about Alfred Schutz. Now we are going to discuss about ethnomethodology. Okay, so let's start with ethnomethodology. So he introduced this perspective. It is introduced by Harold Garfinkel, or rather than saying introduced, you can say it is more systematized. Okay, Harold Garfinkel in 1940s. You can in his book Studies in Ethnomethodology. So you can say this perspective was introduced by Harold Garfinkel in late 1940s. It's actually a mix of Alfred Schutz and Talcott Parson. We'll come to Parson. But then it is more systematized in his book Studies in Ethnomethodology, which came in 1967. Okay, now he is an American sociologist. Okay, American sociologist. So you can write one line. This perspective was introduced by an American sociologist, Harold Garfinkel, in the late 1940s. Okay, as a mix of, if you want, you can write Alfred Schutz and Talcott Parson, and later it is more systematized in his book Studies in Ethnomethodology 1967. So one sentence is ready. Okay, so if you see, Harold Garfinkel is actually a student of Alfred Schutz and he was a student of Talcott Parson also. So he is having influence of both. So that's why you can see a fusion of, Alfred Schutz and Talcott Parson. Okay, so it's actually a mix of both approach. So ethnomethodology is given further boost to non-positivism, and this approach is giving importance to the meanings that people give to their daily life. Like the emphasis is on understanding the reality in terms of the methods or views used by people in their daily life. This approach has been developed by Harold Garfinkel that we have already discussed in his Studies of Ethnomethodology in 1967. This approach uses the method of accounts. That is, the stories that people tell for the purpose of understanding a situation. So you saw an accident outside, okay? So what people will tell different stories, right? To understand that situation. And an ethnomethodologist, what he do is he collect all the information and he'll reinterpret that. So that's what ethnomethodology. So you use the method of accounts, that means the stories that the people tell to understand a particular situation. So you collect all those various viewpoints and you make your own interpretation. That's what ethnomethodologists do. So basic difference between phenomenology and ethnomethodology is in the source of meaning which people generate in their mind. Okay, the source of meaning people generate in their mind. So it is actually a socio-psychological approach taking into consideration the individual's understanding or individual accounts, right? So when we discuss about the similarity between sociology and psychology or comparison between sociology and psychology, you can write this. Okay, it's actually a socio-psychological approach because we are considering the meanings of people or the stories that people tell, or we are taking into individuals into account for this approach. So I told you already the difference between phenomenology and sociology is in the source of meaning that generate, right? The source of meaning people generate in their mind. In the case of phenomenology, meanings are generated with respect to a particular phenomena, whereas in ethnomethodology, detailed individual accounts are taken from individuals with reference to a particular situation. Okay, so in ethnomethodology, detailed individual accounts are taken from individuals with reference to a particular situation, and ethnomethodologist then takes out the relevant material from the detailed account. In the case of phenomenology, meanings are generated with respect to a particular phenomena. Okay, and that is taken. So here detailed account is taken and the ethnomethodologist will take the relevant portions from that. So I hope this is clear for all of you. Now when we discuss about Durkheim, I told you Durkheim's subject matter is studying social facts. So Harold Garfinkel is also giving importance to social facts. He is also considering social facts as a fundamental social phenomena. But there is a difference. When we discuss about Durkheim, I told you social facts according to Durkheim is external to individual and having a coercive influence over individual. But when it comes to Harold Garfinkel or in ethnomethodology, they consider the objectivity of the social facts as the accomplishment of members. Now, the two central ideas of ethnomethodology is actually indexicality and reflexivity. Indexicality and reflexivity. Now, what do you mean by indexicality? It means the sense of an object or phenomena is actually context specific, okay? So it is basically based on context specific. So members or the actors make sense of phenomena on the basis of certain context, right? So that is crystal clear. So they are giving importance to context specific. And that's what you mean by indexicality. Reflexivity means our sense of order is based on conversational process, okay? Conversational process. It is created in a talk, okay? So conversation is important, and that's what we have already discussed. They are giving importance to individual accounts. So context specific and conversational process. So here the assumption is members give meaning to their own life. So it means members give meaning to situations and construct their own world rather than shaped by it. Okay, so they give meaning to their own world. So that's why you are using method of accounts. So in simple language, in short, the ethnomethodologist is not concerned about macrostructure, neither microstructure. They are concerned about the artful practices that produce both structures. So this is one important point, conversational process. So conversation analysis is one of the most important aspect of conversation analysis is one of the most important aspect of ethnomethodology. So what is ethnomethodology? Basically, you saw an accident. Okay, so rather than you interpreting, you go to the people who saw the accident, you take various versions and listen to all the stories that they have told you, and you take the relevant portions out of it. Okay, so that's what method of accounts, and that's what ethnomethodologist. So ethnomethodologist must be a trained investigator. Now, so we have understood non-positivism completely. We have understood about Weber, we have understood about Mead, we have discussed about phenomenology, and we have discussed about ethnomethodology. So ethnomethodology and phenomenology are pure non-positivist method, and you can call it a subjective understanding of subjective reality. On the other hand, positivism is objective understanding of objective reality. In between Mead and Weber, objective understanding of subjective reality. Now let's see the elements of non-positivism. Like we have seen in case of positivism, let's see the elements of non-positivism in general. Okay, we have seen it in case of symbolic interactionism, the characteristics and the principles. We have seen it in case of ethnomethodology. We have seen it in case of phenomenology. Now let's see in general. Let's generalize. Okay, so elements of non-positivism. Again, just from the point of view of an examination, otherwise we have discussed all those things in detail, right? So you can see certain elements from the following discussions that we have done, right? So the first point you can write is non-positivist emphasis on understanding social phenomena in terms of their internal sides represented by meanings, sentiments, emotions, motives, etc. Right? So internal dimensions, internal aspects. Earlier we have discussed about external when we discussed about positivism, right? Second, according to this approach, scientific methods similar to natural sciences cannot be used in sociology, and we have seen that, right? So in general, you can see here the non-positivist favor the generation of qualitative data, that means description, and use of qualitative methods like deductivism. Okay, so qualitative methods like deductivism, comparative analysis, etc. Positivism, you can see methods directly from natural science like quantitative methods. I've given you example, like in case of Durkheim's study of suicide, he used statistical techniques, right? And there are a lot of limitations to apply that in social phenomena. So here, qualitative methods. One more example you can write here is Weber's method of Verstehen. Verstehen, okay? We'll discuss about Verstehen in detail. So Verstehen is actually devised for study of social action. Now, third limitation you can say, or third point, there is no possibility, or they are not interested in forming theory, okay? So non-positivists reject the possibility of formation of general theories. Rather, it is an approach emphasizing more on understanding. Now, you can see initial non-positivists attempted to develop causal theories, but later non-positivists like phenomenologists and ethnomethodologists rejected such possibilities. Initial non-positivist means I talked about Weber. So if you see in the understanding of sociology, he is saying sociology is the study of human action and the meanings attached by the actor to his action, and also you need to arrive at an explanation of cause and effect. That's what I mean by initial non-positivist attempted to make causal theory, but later non-positivist, specifically phenomenologists and ethnomethodologists, they rejected the possibility of making theories or causal explanation. Last, one more point you can say, testability is again difficult, right? So in this approach, the testability and prediction are generally considered distinct dreams. It is not possible. On the other hand, when we discuss about positivism, you should be making theory which is universally applicable. It must be testable, and you should also predict the future course of society. That is not considered true here. That is not possible. Okay, so the reality rests in the minds of the individual and it keeps on changing. So you cannot predict anything. And non-positivists favor subjectivity and highlight the futility of an objective approach, right? And they are saying objectivity is not desirable in sociology, and which is not possible also. Now, see, you can see a lot of instances where non-positivists do use a logical approach in which they tend to eliminate subjectivity of the investigator, but they do accommodate values and biases. There will be biases and values in non-positivism. Okay, now what are the criticisms you can write? See, again, the dilemma between objectivity and subjectivity is not able to solve. One point you can write. So that problem, that issue is not solved through this approach also. Again, there is not a single methodological approach. Some non-positivist is using quantitative approach also, or quantitative methods or quantitative data also, although they are talking about qualitative data and qualitative method. One classical example is the study of Cicerel. Cicerel is an ardent critic of quantitative method, but he used statistical data in a study of juvenile delinquencies. Okay, so in the study he used statistical data, although he is a critic of quantitative data and approach. And another limitation you can say, this method is heavily dependent on the investigator. So the investigator must be properly trained, and otherwise there will be problem with the investigation, right? So there will be huge amount of biases or values which are involved in this method. So the investigator must be properly trained, and everything depends on the investigator. Another limitation you can say is this approach is actually inconsistent. The same phenomena studied by different people is giving different explanations and different understanding. So there is no single understanding, or it is actually inconsistent approach. And other thing is, you can say it is suitable for only micro phenomena and it is not applicable or suitable for macro phenomena. Then another limitation, there is no possibility of theory, there is no universalization possible, no causal explanation possible, testability is not there, prediction is not there, so this is considered as vague, unscientific. Okay, these are the limitations that you can write. So I hope this is clear for all of you. So in this lengthy video, we have covered Earlier we have covered positivism and its critique. Now we have covered the non-positivism, then Weber, then Mead, then Alfred Schutz, then Harold Garfinkel, and we have discussed about certain other thinkers and theories. Then we have discussed in general what is non-positivism and what are the limitations of non-positivism. I hope this is clear for all of you. You have enough content to write any exam now.